Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Advent Study. Tonight, our story reading is called Exodus. That's the title. But before we actually jump into the story reading, remember, I like to start us out with the scripture and reflect just a little bit as we are supposed to do during Advent. During the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." Who were these Magi? Where did they come from? Why did they come to worship a foreign king? This story doesn't tell us, and there are questions we will not have answered until we get to heaven. But what the story does tell us is that God provides a way for all people to come to him. Wow. So, I want you to know that I was a hard case. I've always said that when I finally done yielded and surrendered my life to my King, I feel like God himself, maybe, or one of his angels for sure, had his little hand over me, over my head. You know how a parent will do that with a child, kind of keep their hand on their head. And so then, they can't go too far off, to kind of pull them back in. I've often said that that's what God did to me, and that when I finally surrendered, he said, "Oh, thank goodness I can sit down finally and have a cup of coffee." God makes a way. So whoever you have in your life that you think, what's it going to take? Let me tell you, God makes a way. If there is somebody in need of hearing and following that star in their life, God makes a way. He made a way for you, didn't he? And maybe you're thinking, well, but I've done this or this or this. God makes a way. He loves you just as you are. And he makes a way to bridge that gap and bring us to the place of surrender where we realize how amazing he is. So be encouraged tonight. And be encouraged for those that you're praying for and believe in God for a magnificent, huge, smashing transformation in their life. Because it will happen. God will make a way. Ready to read? Only once before in his life had Jotham tasted roast duck. He loved it then, and he loved it now. Along with the lamb and the yams and the bread, and well, the feast was like nothing Jotham had ever dreamed of. They were seated around the inside of Salamar's huge tent, sitting on pillows, legs crossed, forearms resting on their knees, and before each man and a few boys that were present sat a small bowl of water. Jotham thought, this is a strange way to drink water. But he was so thirsty, so he raised his bowl to his mouth and drank it all down. Ishtar, sitting next to him, sputtered for a moment, then fell over laughing. "My friend," he said, "this water is not for drinking. It's for washing your hands in between the courses." Jotham's face turned red, and several of the men around him laughed. But a girl in pink and white robes with a veil over her face filled his bowl again from a bag of water. And soon everyone except Jotham had forgotten the incident. The feast was being held in tribute to Nathan, who sat at the place of honor to the right of Salamar, in celebration of old warriors reunited, he had told the assembly at the beginning of the meal, and to thank the gods that my friend is safe and well. "There is only one God, you know," Jotham heard Nathan say to Salamar, a mischievous grin on his lips. Salamar had laughed and said, "So there is for you, my brother, and perhaps so shall there be one day for me." Jotham could see that it was an old game that the two had played. and wondered how Nathan could be friends with someone who believed so differently. It's okay to have friends that believe differently. It's okay to know them. Let your light shine before them. Okay, back to the story. When Jotham was stuffed till he thought roast duck would start coming out his ears, and after the daughters of Solomar had performed a dance, Ishtar led Jotham back to his own little tent, where a place had been made for Jotham. I believe I will like having you travel with us, Ishtar said, as they lay in the open end tent watching the stars. I believe I will too, Jotham said. Then a moment later, he realized he didn't even know why the caravan was in Palestine or where it was headed. We follow the stars, Ishtar said when Jotham asked. My father and uncles are royal astrologers for His Majesty Sheikh Kanarak of Armarath. There we go. Jotham stared at Ishtar in astonishment. This must be how Ishtar felt when I told him my story, he thought. Aloud, he whispered, your father and uncles are royalty? Ishtar laughed. No, not royalty, but high government officials. Jotham didn't see much difference. He had never met anybody important before. Why are you here? He asked. Ishtar lay back with his hands under his head and stared straight up at the stars. Many months ago, my father and uncle saw a sign in the heavens. Ever since then, we have traveled west, bringing a message and gifts from the Sultan. Sorry, I put an R in there. Jotham scrunched up his face. A message for whom? Why, for your new king, of course, Ishtar answered. What new king? Ishtar sat up and stared at Jotham as if he had just asked how to ride a camel. The new king that is to be born to your people. Surely you know of this great thing. Jotham shook his head slowly. Feeling like a fool Nathan had once pretended to be, feeling like the fool that Nathan had once pretended to be. I don't know, he stammered. Then all of a sudden it struck him. We used to call that a V8 moment. Anybody remember that? I could have had a V8. The Messiah, he shouted. Messiah? Ishtar said. Yes, the Messiah. I told you about him. The one whose cousin I will be. And together they talked excitedly through the night. Jotham could hardly believe that this huge caravan had been traveling for months just to visit his cousin, who wasn't even born yet. How did your father and uncles know about the Messiah? He asked at one point. It is very complicated, Ishtar answered, and I do not understand it all myself, but I know that two stars arose in a place where they should not have been. And the time of this event somehow told them a new king would be born in this land. And so the Sultan sent our caravan to pay respects and offer gifts of friendship. Early the next morning, before the sun was up, one of Salomar's servants woke the two boys. We are leaving, he said. The boys barely had time to get dressed and devour some meat and cheese before all of the tents were down and packed onto camels. Jotham gave Nathan a long hug goodbye. I don't want you to leave, Jotham whispered. Nathan took his young friend's head in his hands and said, Jehovah willing, we shall see each other again soon. Then, just as the sun rose behind them, casting long shadows, Jotham gave one last wave goodbye to Nathan. The caravan molded itself smoothly into a single line, heading away from Jericho and into the hills of Judea. The route was now becoming familiar to Jotham, but this time he was able to enjoy the trek. Even if Decca is still alive, he thought, he would never dare attack such a mighty caravan as this. The camel stretched as far ahead of and behind him as he could see. Some carried cargo, some carried women, whom Jotham assumed to be wives of the men, and several carried Ishtar's father and uncles. Every once in a while, the men would gather together on their camels and have a discussion, pointing this way or that way. As for the two boys, they walked beside the camel and carried their tent and was led by the servant charged with looking after them. Jotham looked at all the women in the caravan and said, "Ishtar, is your mother among the wives of your father?" Ishtar looked sad. "My mother is not among the living," he said. "She died when I was very young. She was my father's first wife, and he has never taken another." Jotham wanted to ask why, but he didn't want to seem impolite. All day the caravan trudged on through the sand and the rock. They ate their lunch as they walked, because, as Jotham well knew, to stop and start this mighty force would take a great deal of time. Finally, the sun began to set, and the camels were tethered to bushes. The tents were raised almost before Jotham could blink, and he was grateful when he could finally sit by a fire and eat some dinner. He noticed that Ishtar's father and uncles didn't eat, but instead stood around with some funny-looking tools in their hands, looking into the sky. After dinner, Jotham walked for a short distance from the camp and sat at the base of a lone and scrawny olive tree. He looked again into the sky and saw once again his star, the one he had been watching since his journey began. "I'm coming, Mother," he said, and then tears of loneliness began to run down his cheeks. "What's this?" a voice came out of the dark. "A boy sits alone with tears in his eyes? That must mean that Ishtar of Persia is not doing his job." Jotham looked over to see Salamar, Ishtar's father, approaching from the camp. "No, no, no, sir," Jotham exclaimed. "Ishtar's been a wonderful host. I just..." Salamar held up his hand. "Peace, my friend. I was only joking. But what is it that makes Jotham of Jericho so sad on this night?" Jotham turned his eyes back to the sky. "I miss my family," he said. "Ah, I understand," said Salamar, sitting down. "We often don't appreciate those we love until we are separated from them." Salamar was silent for a moment, and Jotham could see that his thoughts were far away. After a moment, he shook his head and said to Jotham, "But soon we shall be in Jerusalem, and perhaps there you will find word of them." Jotham nodded, and then Salamar added, "And what is it that you are staring at in the sky?" He turned and raised his head to look where Jotham had been staring, and then gasped. "Jotham," he said, "that star, how long have you been watching it?" Puzzled, Jotham said, "Ever since I left my family." "That is the star for which we have searched," Salamar said excitedly. "We have not seen it for many days. Even tonight, we looked not an hour ago and it was not there." Then he laughed and he jumped up, saying, "But for Jotham of Jericho, it appears." Salamar was almost jumping for joy, and it reminded Jotham of the many marriage dances he had seen. "Quickly," he shouted, "we must tell the others." Soon there was shouting and pointing throughout the entire caravan, and orders were given to strike camp. Before Jotham could even find Ishtar, tents, which had only just been put up, were now taken down and packed. Quickly, supervisors were shouting, "We leave at once!" All this scared Jotham, and he thought he had done some terrible thing. By the time he found Ishtar, he was crying again. "Jotham, what is it? What is happening?" Ishtar yelled over the excitement of the camp. "I don't know," Jotham cried. "All I did was look at a star." Oh, that's adorable. Was he in trouble? No. Had the star appeared that was leading them? And who are these wonderful men? Who is this caravan? I've been asking you that for a couple of days now. You think it's the Magi? During the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." That's Matthew 2, 1 and 2. Well, we've already said, who were these Magi? Where did they come from? And we have a little bit of better understanding about them according to this story. It's a story that we're reading. Brilliant men, astrologers, officials, and there wasn't just 3 camels. There was an entire caravan of people that were coming to pay tribute to a king. They were trying to find their way. God always makes a way. Now, what the story does tell us is that God provided ways for all the people to come to Jesus. And he's still doing it today. He made a way for all to come. Even the caravan with this man at the head of it who was saying, maybe someday there'll just be one God for me, but right now there's lots of them. And we're going to follow the star to pay tribute to a king. Didn't even think about it as it could be a god, a king, royalty. See, God makes a way. Let this encourage you right now. His birth and the celebration of his birth is not just for a group of people or just a certain church, y'all. Jesus came for all people. Say that. Say all people. Say that includes me. Yeah. He accepts all people no matter where they're at. On their spiritual journey, he accepts them. He loves them. He loves you. And those you're praying for that you might even be disheartened about or discouraged about, understand that you're kind of like the Jotham right now, looking towards Jesus, and you're praying and you're believing for a miracle. You're believing for answers. And all of a sudden, because Jotham of Jericho showed up, you bringing forth light and love and prayers, there will be a light in their life that is going to direct them to where they need to go. And they're accepted right where they're at and loved. Wow. Jesus came to earth to teach us how to love, not how to hate. Oh, grab a hold of that with everything that's happening in our world right now. The church, you and me, the people that are celebrating Advent with our hearts, or even if you've never celebrated it before, but you're kind of checking it out right now. Those that celebrate Christmas as the reason for the season, to us, we have been shown how to love, and we have to be the lovers of men. I'm telling you, that's good stuff right there. So as you do your Christmas shopping, maybe there's a gift you could prepare for Jesus. Remember, it's your big brother's birthday. Maybe you could make a list of all those you are holding grudges against, or you dislike because of the way they act or the way they live, or whom you snub because they're different. Maybe you could give that list to Jesus and thank him for each individual and promise that you're going to pray for them instead. I guarantee you that would make him so pleased and happier than anything else that we could offer. Because Jesus always makes a way. And so he wants to challenge us in our hearts to emulate that in him. And the glorious news is this, gang. We don't do it in our own ability. So I got a piece of hair that's like sticking right here, and I'm not trying to look at you through my hair. We don't do it in our ability, because if it was up to us, woofda. But we do it by his Spirit in us. I like to pray this: Jesus, show me this person through your eyes and not their own. Not their own, not my own. Show me this person through your eyes and not my own. Now listen, that doesn't mean that everybody is your best friend. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean that everybody you're going to go have lunch with. I mean, there are things that might have happened where someone has hurt you. You are trying to move past that with God's help, you will. And you forgive. Maybe there's been hardships, that words, things. Maybe you were abused by that person. That doesn't mean you need to go and hang out with them. Goodness sake. But that's different than praying for them and asking God to show you them through his eyes and not your own. So many times we get that whole kind of thing confused, like if I forgive or if I begin to pray, then that means I got to be like their buddy. No, not everybody is meant to be your best buddy. Amen. But big brother Jesus, he's everybody's buddy, right? But so for us right now, letting God have love through us so that love can ooze out into the world around us, because that is going to change everything, isn't it? And so we can each kind of be that Jotham of Jericho that we read about tonight, in essence of looking to the star was Christ, right? Be believing God and asking God to show us people through his eyes and not our own, and to really just get that list, whether you really write it down or you just process it through, and lay all that stuff down. Lay it all down before the Lord, and pick up his love instead. That's what I just heard in my heart. Lay down that other stuff and pick up his love instead. Is there a better time than Advent season coming up on Christmas? Could there be a better time to do it? No, I don't think so. I think this is it. Well, God bless you, and happy Advent to you, friends. And I know that the Lord is blessing you, and I know he's loving the world through you, because you are surrendered and you're letting him love the world through you. So Merry Christmas, and we will see you again tomorrow.